Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome back to the Yiboneh Beit Midrash. Welcome home to Torah. A very, very warm welcome back to Torah. And I want to mention, by the way, we always try to encourage everyone to learn Hebrew. Please use the Hebrew. Put your finger on the spots. For those watching or afterwards, you could find, there'll be a link down below in the description box to our website where we actually have the source sheets, the material just in Hebrew. In order to get the English sheets, you have to email me and be on my emailing list or show up live, and you'll get an English supporting source sheet. Also, I would encourage you, we usually only deal with like one or two verses of the whole Parsha. Of course, we spend close to an hour discussing it, but if you want to go back into other other sentences, other psukim, other paragraphs. So again, if you go down below, there'll be a link to the same page where you'll find the source sheets, and you could, per view, you can go and look at other parts of the Parsha, which I strongly encourage. This is all based on the writings of the Yakar, and here we go. Let's get started. As I mentioned, we're in chapter 32 of Genesis, and it's actually verse 11. Now, even though that's the verse, he will be discussing, the Yakar will be discussing some of the previous verses, some of the verses that come after, but this is the verse itself. And it says, Ketonti mikol chasadim. Okay, when did Yaakov say these words? On his way back, right? He's about to approach Esav. He has not yet encountered Esav yet, but he is preparing. You know, he sent the angels, he sent the gifts, he made his prayers, he split his encampment into two, and so there you have the beginning, the lead up to this verse. And he says, I have become small from all the kindnesses and from all the truth that you have rendered your servant. So he's referring to Hashem, he's talking to God. And then he says, from with my staff I crossed this Jordan, meaning when he originally left Eretz Yisrael to go to Haran to find a wife. So what did he have with him? Just a little bit of a background, that Eliphaz, this was one of the sons, right? One of the sons of Esav. Esav sent him to kill Yaakov, okay? And instead of killing him, he was sympathetic to Esav, to Yaakov, his uncle. And what did he do? He basically made a deal. Yaakov says, look, if you're considered a poor person, you have nothing to your name, it's like you're dead. Why don't I give you everything that I have, and then you can go back and you can tell Esav that you killed me, that I'm dead.
You prove that Yaakov was Jewish. A Jew without money is not dead.
Okay, but what did he have left with him? He had this staff, and this staff, if you go in the English source sheet, I added something at the very end, that as Rabbi Breitowitz mentioned, that when Noach sent the dove on one of his final trips, the dove came back with an olive branch, and attached to the olive branch were some olives, and he crushed those olives, and he himself used them, but they were hidden away, so to speak. And apparently, when Yaakov is at the place where the dream took place with the ladder, and he anointed the place, he anointed the rocks with oil. Where did he get that oil? That was what he kept within his staff. He had like a little pocket within the staff. That's the oil. Some say that it was miraculously showed up, but according to others, it was handed down from Noach. And this same oil, apparently, is what he went back for also, right? Pachim katanim, for these small vessels, and it had his stamp. Because believe it or not, Yaakov is like a Kohen Gadol. In other words, when the miracle of Hanukkah, which is coming up, actually happened a long time ago, but the celebration, the memorialization, the reliving, B'ezrat Hashem, of rededication of the temple, and it goes all the way back to these earlier ideas, whether with Noach, whether with Yaakov, and of course with the Hasmoneans, finding a Pach Katan that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. As some say, it was actually Yaakov's seal. Okay, let's start with this idea. We read the verse, but what happens is the Yakar immediately begins and says, let's take a look. Nirim and Devarim. The way we see it is like this. The Yaakov was Hiskir Livnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shnei Haftachos. In our verse, now really it's not our verse, it's the verse before. Actually, it's verse 10. So if you go to, on the English sheets, I believe, number 10.
That's why
Right.
it's good.
Yeah. So it says over there, and Yaakov said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, V'yomer Yaakov Elohei Avi, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Avi Yitzchak, Hashem ha'omer Elai, Shuv li'artzecha, u'lemodatecha, ve'etiva imach. Okay, so what we're focusing really on is the God, right? God said, return to the, right? This is at the point where he's supposed to be going. He's on his way back to Eretz Yisrael, and Yaakov is reminding God that you made these promises. You said to me, return to your land, which is now Eretz Yisrael, and I will do good to you. Now in Hebrew, it's the etiva imach. I am going to do good to you or with you. That's going to be the question. But right now, let's say it means I'm going to do good with you. Now, Rashi had mentioned that's what he's doing. Okay? That he's reminding Hashem. Just like you promised me, you're fulfilling them. Now let's read on. V'yomar, Kishem shekiyamta li haftacha achas. Just like you fulfilled for me one of the promises. What are the two promises? First of all, we'll see clearly in the next half a minute. Just like you fulfilled for me one of your promises, kach tekayem li gam hashniya. Please, right? He's requesting, just like you fulfilled already one of the promises, right? You will fulfill. Not even a request, a statement of faith, right? You will, I know you will. You will also fulfill with me the second one, which is like this. Gam haftacha rishona hayasal shmira. Now, if we actually go to chapter 28, verse 15, remember, we're in chapter 32. But if you go back to 28:15, you can find this in number 6 on the source sheet. And behold, I am with you. God is saying, I am with you. It's true. Anochi imach, I am with you. That's why I'm going to translate imach as with you. And what else will I do? I will guard you. Ushmarticha bekol asher telech. I am going to go with you. I'm going to guard you everywhere you go. That is what? I am with you. I am with you, therefore I'm going to guard you everywhere you go. And the second promise is v'hashivoticha el ha'adama hazot. And I will return you to this land, to the very land you're leaving from. This is going back to chapter 28, right? And I will restore you to this land. For I will not forsake you until I've done what I have spoken concerning you. In other words, I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to leave you until I have fulfilled everything that I have spoken to you about. So what are the two promises? Number one, when you go to Chutz La'aretz, when you leave this land, or anywhere, I'm always going to be with you, number one. And number two, I'm going to return you back to the land of Israel. Just keep in mind, we say, Siman, what do you call? Ma'isa Avo Siman Labanim. These are foreshadows or harbingers, things that happened to our parents. They were not just prophetic, I mean, they were ingrained in not just history, right? They were to unfold in the future. They happened once, they'd happen again. Keep that in mind. It's called Ma'isa Avos Simin Labanim. So these were the two promises. So what's happening here? We mentioned, he said, after you fulfilled one, I'm sure you're going to fulfill the other. V'achar shekavar huftach al hashmira, after the fact, you have fulfilled. Remember, he said, for all the goodness you've done to me, I have become diminished. I am small compared to all the goodness. So he obviously, the whole time he was at Lavan, and trust me, he had a hard time. There were a lot of pains. It was not easy for him. Imagine working 14 years for the woman you really love. Remember, it was 7 years and he got tricked, and he worked another 7 years, right, for Rachel. Okay, so 14 years. And then another 6 years just to acquire whatever wealth he did have in order to come back. And it took him another 2 years of traveling time and whatnot. So he was away for 22 years. But after the fact that you did promise me regarding the Shmirah, and that I know was fulfilled, V'sheyashivu el eretz moladato, and I'm going to be returning to the land of Israel, where I was born. Im kain ma zeh shehutzrach lahavticho shenis bebeis Lavan. This is like the crucial question the Yakar is asking. Why then in chapter 31, remember this is still before, we're in chapter 32, why while he's in the house of Lavan, before he returns to Israel, God says, Shuv el eretz moladeticha, return to your land. Okay, that's a good thing. I need to know when to go. God tells me, fine, I'm going to go. V'yeh imach, and I will be with you. Didn't Hashem already promise him once? Wherever you go, I'm going to be with you, and I'm going to do good for you. That's going to be like the crucial question. Why did God need to reassure him, or what does it even mean, V'yeh imach, I will be with you? And the Yakar says, Elavadai, with absolute certainty. Shahavtachazu lo ne'emar ala shmira mikol ra. Okay, this is a little bit hard to understand, and I hope that we can all meditate on these ideas. But it seems that what the Yakar is saying is, this promise that I'm going to be with you is not necessarily promising him that bad things wouldn't happen. As we know, I don't know if we're calling bad, but Yisurim, challenges, tormenting, pain, right? Sometimes we can even translate as punishments, but even the word punishment needs translation, because that's not a good word without understanding what's really behind it. But anyway, so it's not a shmira, a guarding against mikol ra. Like we have a verse, actually I didn't write down where the verse is, but it's a famous verse. It's in Proverbs, right? Sun me ra va'aseh tov. I think I do have it here written in. And you'll find this it's in Psalms 34:15. Shun evil and do good. So in Hebrew, it's sur me'ra v'yaseh tov. Okay, so there's an idea that it's not good enough just to not do evil, right? I'm sure there's a lot of expressions nowadays about this, right? It's not good enough for good men just not to do evil. We have to make a tikkun. We have to make a real action, a real pu'ula, some initiation of positivity, right? It's not good enough just to refrain, but to actually to do good. Okay, keeping that in mind, that when God said, I'm going to guard you, it was not guarding you against evil, meaning to say, it wasn't that he was just going to, or maybe even be involved in removing evil, but the whole idea of the bracha that I'm going to be with you is what? To do good for you. It's meaning it's synonymous. Just like the words, I'm going to do good with you or for you, is the same as I am going to be with you, as the Yakar explains. What does it mean? Aseh tov, hainu lehetiv imo, that he's actually going to do good with Yaakov. Kach amar kan bimkom eya imach ve'etiva imach. In other words, they're synonymous. Vu perashal eya imach. In other words, I can't just keep saying the same thing, but that's what it is. It's in place of, I will do good for you, he's saying, I'm going to be with you, which proves that it's synonymous. When God is with you, that's good. That's really good. Okay? Okay, that's the first paragraph. I think we should have a takeaway from this, and that is that when we think that what we consider bad, it's not even bad. In fact, the Baal Tanya explains what is the word ra, right? In fact, in Isaiah 45, I think it's 45:7, God says, I create everything, right? He says, I create evil, right? I create all these things. Even God says, I create evil. So evil cannot be bad because there's no emanation of what we call bad. So let's not translate ra as bad. The Balatanya explains there's good that's revealed and open, and we call that good. We actually refer to that as good. And then there's good that's hidden, and we refer to that as evil or bad. It means we don't understand the goodness that's going to result or come from it in the end. Okay, the next paragraph begins like this. V'hinei be'inyan ha'tava hayalolomar. Regarding that goodness, what the Yakar, he's an expert in grammar and in language, and he assumes that there's an easier way to say it, that I'm going to do good to you, ve'etiva lach. But you know what? It says imach. But rather, it mentions the word, I'm going to do good with you. To teach you what? Okay, now this is a little bit complicated for me. I hope you guys get it. There's a few ideas. It's going to teach you that shebe'inyan kabbalat tovot, regarding the idea of receiving this goodness from Hashem, well, let's say receiving goodness in general. Tzarich liyot balav imo b'milakto, which is a strange concept. But there is a halacha by shomrim, interestingly enough, people who do guarding, or people who are borrowing things and are responsible for the item that they borrowed. That's called a shomer chinam. So if you're with the person you borrowed the item from, for example, you borrowed someone's ox, and you're doing some plowing, and the owner of the ox is with you, and the ox dies or is injured, but he's with you, the owner's with you. He can see you didn't whip him too much, you didn't not feed him, right? There's not. It's called normal usage or a freak accident. So you're not going to be responsible. If he was not with you, you very well may be. You borrowed something, he's not around, you have to give him back what you borrowed. But the very fact he's with you, even though you borrowed it and you're responsible, in this case, you're not responsible. So interestingly enough, that when the owner, and in this case, I think we're talking about Hashem, there's a lessening of responsibility on our part, or maybe culpability. Let's say use that, not responsibility, culpability. A lessening of culpability on our part when Hashem is with us. That's how I'm reading this. Okay? So all he says is that regarding receiving the goodness, the owner needs to be with you, whatever that means. Now, the next thing it says, Ki adam tzark la'asos b'derech hateva, kol asher yamatu b'kocho la'asot. Now, another idea of receiving goodness is the person who's receiving the goodness still has to do everything we call hishtadlut, every normal effort that a normal person needs to do under normal circumstances. I know I use the word normal quite a few times here. Standard, right? There's standards of efforts that are made. Like if you don't buy the lottery ticket, there's no way to win, right? If you don't show up for the interview, you don't get the job. And if you don't show up the next day, you're not going to stay employed, right? There's certain things, and you get the idea that when you in order to succeed, there is a minimum. You should be doing at least the minimum in the natural world. Now, which reminds me of two Gemaras, and I want to show you them. It's number 3 and number 4 on the source sheet. This idea of Rabbi Yanai, this is in Shabbos 32a. It's on page 1 at the bottom. Whenever he would cross a river on a ferry, I don't know exactly how he would examine the ferry, but I guess he wouldn't get on a scuba suit and go in and check the hole from the outside. Perhaps he would just check from the inside that everything that wasn't leaking, right? He wants to make it across the river in a healthy way. He would check to see maybe there's a tu'udah, maybe there's a little bit of an inspection sticker, right? And it's up to date. Who knows? But he apparently would check the ferry before he crossed the river. And there's a statement that he said was a person should never stand in a place of danger, saying that Hashem, who's on high, will perform a miracle for him. Maybe he won't. What's the guarantee? And not only that, if a miracle was performed, I'm not so sure you'd be so happy about it. Because when miracles are performed for you, God forbid, I'm going to say God forbid, it sounds really weird, it's counterintuitive, that there is a deduction from your merits of eternity. Hashem is changing nature for you now and to benefit you now. So in other words, it doesn't mean that every miracle that ever happens to you is a deduction. It may not be for you. And that's the best, right? When a miracle happens for the Jewish people as a whole, right? But when it happens just to you personally, it's not necessarily always a good thing, okay? Because there's a deduction of your merits, all that you built up for yourself in heaven, in your bank account in heaven. There's like a little bit of a deduction. You're withdrawing some of that, and you're not necessarily interested in that, I'm sure. Rav Chanin asks, where do we know this from? And it's our verse. When Yaakov says, I am not worthy of all the mercies. So what does that mean? What was he worried about? What was he concerned about to even make such a statement? We already know that God took care of him. God was with him. That's true. But what was he worried about now, coming into the land, that maybe there was some diminishing? Okay, so we could say maybe he felt there was a lot of miracles, and there were a lot of miracles on behalf, on things that he did. Yeah, so as we just mentioned, and Larry had said that, when you say, I am diminished, I'm small for all the kindnesses, I got more than I deserve. So that fits in well with this idea. If I got much more than I deserved, that could be a deduction of my merits. And I need my merits when I'm coming against Esav. Another idea is that he actually felt that maybe he made a mistake in flattering his brother Esav. When he sent the malachim, when he sent the angels in the beginning of the Parsha, so he mentions my lord Esav a few times. He says your servant Yaakov a few times, right? So this also, and he bowed down to him 7 times. There's a certain idea that's called flattering an evil person, and flattery to an evil person could be considered a sin. Obviously, it was in order to save his life. He was not held in account for flattery in this case, but he felt maybe this would also diminish from because sin also could diminish from, and does diminish from, the merits. Okay, so that's how he felt. Let's go on. We are we're in the third line on the second paragraph, where we just mentioned that a person needs to do everything humanly possible with his own efforts, but you don't take credit. As Larry just mentioned, it's about his humility. The Kadosh Baruch Hu yigmor al yado. So you begin the work, Hashem will finish it for you. Keep this in mind. And not only will Hashem finish the job for you, but wait till you hear the next 3 words. He adds, or 4 words, Hoisiv lo shefa bracha. Hashem will do even more when he finishes it off than you could have done if you were finishing the job off yourself. Unbelievable. As he mentions earlier it's in chapter 32, verse 6, when he says, Vihili shor v'chamor. Now, I'm not going to go into it. It's quite complicated, but the verse itself says, when he's speaking to Esau, he's telling the angels, I have acquired oxen and donkey. Now, that's singular. In other words, what he had was, as far as the eye can see, a lot of flock, right? And oxen. What do you call it? Herds. So, but he says it in the singular. The truth is, it's actually appropriate. It's okay to use the singular language for many. Like we all know in Israel today, if you have 5 shekels, you say 5 shkalim. But if you have 20, it's in the tens and above, you say esrim shekel. So the more you have, the lower the singular fashion of the denomination of money. So here when he says, Vihili shor v'chamor, he wasn't lying, but he was trying to diminish the chesed. In other words, he didn't want his brother to become so aroused and jealous. He's already afraid, he's mad at him for stealing the bracha of wealth. And if he comes back showing him all this wealth, remember, he also split it into 2 camps, but he wanted to, let's say, downplay. He wanted to downplay the amount of wealth. And that's what he means when he says, Ve'etiva imach, right? He says, that God, you promised I'm going to do good with you. So God would guard him and do the aseh tov, do the good stuff. V'zeh havtacha shniya. And we also said he's going to return him to the land. Shahav ticho l'shloach es habracha basamav. And he promised to send him this blessing of abundance. So that, so far, is where we're at. Al zeh ha'havtacha amar. Regarding this promise, what was said? Derech hanirash niskayim mekavar. It was said in this case, right, in our verse, basically, it certainly shows this was already fulfilled. God already was with him because he says, katonti mikol chasadim. I have become diminished from all of the kindness. You gave me so much more than I deserve. So he already gave him the shefa bracha, so to speak. Ki katon Yaakov dal kocho militlot kol mitziat hono ruchusho b'chocho v'otzem yado. What Yaakov was great at was his humility. Yaakov himself felt and understood his smallness in his own power, that he would not hang all of this unbelievable wealth that he came back with on his own shoulders and saying, I did it. It's because of me. I was so smart. I knew the trick of how to make, I guess it's called breeding, right? There's a husbandry, right? The truth is, I gave in a different share how he did this. It's the mystical divine use, right? But in the Sefer Igeres HaKodesh by the Ramban that speaks about, it's sex, about procreation, that what you have in your mind, okay, goes and flows down to the seed, and that enters the woman, and it's what you have on your mind, holy thoughts, or God forbid the other way around, whatever kind of thoughts you're going to have is going to have an effect. And that's why he was able to, let's say, reproduce. He was involved in the reproduction process through the pictures that he drew or showed the sheep and the goats while they were procreating. Anyway, that's a whole nother shiur, and you'll have to go and find it. Maybe if I can find the shiur, I'll put the link down below, and you can look at that. But what Yaakov was not doing was taking credit. Elavadai shechesed el kol hayom hu osolo esachayla zeh. But rather it was the unbelievable chesed of God, the kindness of Hashem himself, that he gave him every single day, that he produced this unbelievable success. V'haraya zeh, and the proof for this, remember he says, Ki b'machli avarti es hayarden hazeh. When I went over the Jordan to visit and find a wife, to visit Lavan, what did I have with me? Nothing but this one little stick. That's all I had. Vayiti reika mikol. I had nothing. I was poor as dirt, as they say. I couldn't even rub 2 nickels together, right? I had nothing. I was completely empty. I had nothing in my hand except for my staff. V'ota, look as it says. Again, now we're in chapter 32, verse 11. Again, that verse. All I had is Ata, now hayiti l'shnei machanos. Now I have 2 camps. I've become 2 camps. It's the very end of 32:11. I have become 2 camps. What does he mean by that? The ata, ayin, tough, hey, is now. Now, right now. What does the word now mean? Snap to it. It means now. It means happening. It's really like, we're going to see this word, keheref ayin, means like in the blink of an eye. Like, I'm going to just translate it differently, a very, very short time. A significantly short time. If we think of nature, for the amount of time it would have taken for him to amass this amount of wealth, would have been much more than 20 years. meaning that he would have had to come already to Lavan's house with a significant, let's say, starter breed, right? A herd that he already started with. And then over 20 years period, we're talking through natural means, that's what he would have had. But you know what? It was only 6 years. So when it says Keheref Ayin, he's referring to the last 6 years where he acquired all this. What he acquired should have taken at least 25, 30, 40, 50 years. Okay? So let's look at the words. What does it mean, v'ata, right now? What he is saying now is if all the success happened very quickly. Okay, again, the word is like in a split second. But what does he mean? Ki arba esrei shanim avad b'shtei banotav. We know he worked for 14 years for the 2 daughters of Lavan. V'shei shanim b'tzonav, and another 6 years for the rest of the flock that he, right? Really, that's the 6 years. V'kisha'amar lo Lavan. Now, what did Lavan say to him? Look in chapter 30, verse 28. It's number 11. Okay. Then he said, specify your wages for me and I will give them. Meaning ask. Ask for your wages and I will give them. Now this all took place, I'm assuming, in the beginning of the 6 years. But he didn't get it. He got it at the end. Right? So it's like if he got it all at once or he got it in 6 years. Remember, he didn't have it in 6 years. He only asked for it 6 years prior. So he only got it just before he left. But it did take him 2 years to travel. Again, when did he meet up with Esav in that 2 years? It's not so clear because it looks like he went to Sukkot after. And I think he was in Sukkot for either 6 months or 18 months. I forget which one it was. But there's a whole process of 2 years of traveling. So I think he met up with Esav pretty much as soon as he entered Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so now we mentioned this verse in chapter 30, verse 28. Nakvas sacharcha alai ve'ena. Just tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. Bizman muat aseh chayil rechush gadol zeh. It was in a small period of time, let's just say 6 years, that he created or he made all of this abundant amount of flock. Efshar kfi ateva. Lo haya efshar lahasig hon atek ze bizman muat asher kazeh. That which, according to nature, it would not be possible to achieve this amount of multitudes of flocks in such a short time like this. Again, referring to the 6 years or perhaps even less. Imlo kiyad Hashem astazot, unless Hashem was personally involved. As God said, I'm going to do good with you. I'm going to be with you. Very nice. The next paragraph. Even though in the message that Yaakov sent to Esav, which was just shor v'chamor, I have ox and I have donkey. Very strange message. Obviously, there's a lot, and yet he says the opposite. As we already explained, referring to in chapter 32, verse 6, where he says, all I have, or I have an ox and a donkey. Kichesh lo machmas yira. Now the word kichesh means to contradict, but here it means in a sly fashion. Remember, Yaakov is emes. Yaakov is truth. And yet we all know that Yaakov, as, I'm not going to use the word deceiver in a negative sense, because even Rashi explains it was with wisdom, right?
I didn't notice.
Remember that he comes from Rivka, right?
Yes.
And Rivka, right? She's the one who told him to deceive his father.
Yes.
Right? He's listening to his mother. And where does she come from? She's coming from Laban, this whole place over there. Okay, now. So there is this seeming deception. We're just quoting Rashi. Rashi says it's called with wisdom. He didn't lie. Yaakov is emes. He says, it is I. Yitzhak wants to know, who is this? It is I. Is that a lie so far?
Not now.
Esav is your firstborn. Is that a lie? No. But if I say, it is I, Esav, your firstborn. It certainly can sound like a lie, because I'm presenting myself as Esav, your firstborn. But that's impossible, because Yaakov is telling the truth, and even though his mom told him, go in there, be deceptive, he even says, I can't do that. Okay? So this is the character trait of Yaakov, and here Yaakov's doing the same thing with Esav. He says, I have shor v'chamor. He's not lying. He does have shor v'chamor. Lotzi davar sheker mepiv. There's no way, unless he has some kind of fear, that he would even go ahead and kichesh, contradict the truth, let's say. Lomar lo shetarach bitsono kol meshek esrim shana. He gave him the impression, this is what he's telling him. You don't know this, that I only worked the last few years for these sheep. I was away for 20 years. You may think that it took me 20 plus years. It was not this miracle. I mean, his conveying to Esav, it wasn't like all these miracles that took place, because that would arouse jealousy again within his brother. God did for all you because the bracha, you got the bracha, right? No, don't worry. The bracha might still be with you. You have no fight with me, right? What I have here took a lot of work, took a long amount of time. But really, between him and God, he is acknowledging it's nothing I did. I started it. You, God, you finished it off with all the shefa brachot, right? Avahemet enokain. But the truth is, it didn't take 20 years. Ki chalila limilomar sheyakov yomar. There's no way that Yaakov would actually try to say these words, that it was me. Kocho va'otzum yado asa lo etzachayil zeh. There's no way that Yaakov would try to get the message across. It's because of me being smart, because me being brilliant, because I know the secret of husbandry or divine, ways to have these miracles happen to me. Nope. That message was everything happened in the natural fashion. That's the message he's trying to convey, and not lying about it. Okay, now. V'zeu sha'amar, and this is now what we mean when the verse says, the atah, now, hayiti l'shnei machanos. Now I have divided into two camps. Again, kecheref ayin. Kecheref ayin, again, means in a very short period of time. If it was all in one, it would look like a tremendous amount. But if you can divide it into two, it looks less. So again, in a short period of time, how could he have acquired so much? If I would have originally, when I left to go to Lavan's house, remember he was already away for 14 years in the Beit Midrash of Shem and Aver. So it could be in Esav's mind, he already had 14 years worth of husbandry and making a huge amount of a flock. But no, he says, right, when I went, in other words, if I would have had all this to begin with, a huge amount to start with, Hayiti oimer shenitosef v'ruchusha b'derech hateva, then everything that I have today all happened over, like I said, 25, 30 years, 40, almost 40 years worth of husbandry. Avalakshav, but the truth is, now it's teaching you where he's actually hodeh, he's actually admitting, shibimaklo levad avar sayardain. I mean, he's revealing to us, not to his brother Esau, that when I went over the Jordan to go to Lavan's house, the only thing I had was my staff. That's all I had. Im kain emasaynase kol kavod hazeh yesh miyayin. So it's kind of like a rhetorical question. When would all this stuff have happened? Like in a blink of an eye? Yeah. The truth is, yeah. Vaday meit Hashem hayasazos, and it's absolutely clear now, for all this wealth to happen in such a short period of time, it had to be from the hand of God. Al kain bikesh. This is why Yaakov is requesting a second time, let's say, or he's requesting more. Kashem shekiyamta li haftacha shniyazu. In other words, now that I'm coming back into the land, and you're fulfilling that part of the promise, God, kach tekayem li gam et harishona. Also, I'm sure, right? And I want you to fulfill also that first promise about the Shmira. Remember, I'm about to run into Esav, and I'm afraid, what? That I diminished my goodness. Either I got too much good, or I sinned. But either way, he's afraid that he doesn't have the merits. So he's asking, as the verse says in 32:12, Vahatzileni na, save me, please, miyad achi, miyad Esav, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esav. If he was already promised, God would be with him. I never told him that the bad stuff wouldn't happen, but he would be with him. Kiira anochi it oto. Now the word oto means him, right? But we're not going to read it that way. I fear because, right, of him. No. The word oto can mean because of it. I fear because of it. What is he fearing? His sin, the flattery. Okay? V'milat oto is miyuteris, is completely superfluous. It's not necessary to say, because I fear. I fear him. Right? You have yir'eh. You don't need oto. El sharamas el oto avon. This hints the word oto to it, to the sin. Shechota Bimash Chanif LaRasha V'Hafa Kodesh L'Chol. That he fears of the result, the consequences of his sin by giving flattery to such an evil person as his brother, that would transform what we would say his merits into the opposite. Here he says Kodesh L'Chol. So the word Oto, which means him, but in our case it means it, is referring to the Avon, the sin itself. Now the last two sentences go like this. V'yesh omrim, there are some that say, Shal atzmo lo nityareh. Yaakov was not afraid for himself. He had total confidence, total faith. He knew that he didn't sin, and he knew that he was a good guy, and he knew that God was with him. But what was he afraid of? For his wives. He prayed for them. Listen to the words. Sha'al atzmo lo nityareh. He was not afraid for himself. Ki kavar huftach b'shmira. That promise regarding guarding him, that was already promised, and he already lived with it. Zulat shahayireh. But you know what he was afraid of? As the verse, again, it's 32:12. Let me just find it so I can have the whole verse in front of me. Look at how it says in number 12 on page 3. Now deliver me from the hand of my brother, which sounds very personal, from the hand of Esav, for I'm afraid of him. Now look at the English. Lest he come and strike me and strike a mother with children. But in the Hebrew, you don't have to read it like that. Pen yavo v'hikani al eim abanim. That I'm afraid that he will not strike me, but that he will strike the women with the children. And therefore, even if I feel secure, I am like this with God, right? But look what's going around us, right? Pray for others. Pray for the salvation of others, right? So this is the message here. It's a very deep parsha. We only skimmed the surface here. And I encourage people to just learn on their own, learn with Chavrusa. There's so many places, right? There's Partners in Torah. If you're looking for Chavruta, you can email me and I'll try to set you up with somebody. Join us online, whatever it is. There's so many places to learn. The whole world is full of sheker, right? There's unbelievable misinformation and falsehoods going around. The only thing that has been true and will always be true has been the Torah, and I encourage you, don't get lost in the media stream and what's going on around us. Keep the faith, keep learning, and welcome home to Torah, and have a great Shabbos and a great life, and we'll see you next week.
It's